Hi, this is Tracy Collins of Healthy Black Girl Podcast, a weekly podcast centered around Black women and all aspects of our mental, emotional, spiritual, sexual, and physical health and healing. Come join us on this journey. Hey everyone, thank you so much for rejoining us. My name is Tracy Collins and I'm the host of the Healthy Black Girl Podcast. I am so excited because today I have somebody that I know personally. Again, it seems like lately that has kind of been the trajectory of the podcast, but it's also really to highlight the work that Black women are doing just from a global standpoint. And I'm excited to bring forth Rachel Johnson. And she created this wonderful book. It released last year. So I'm glad we can finally get Rachel on the show. But it is Self-Love Workbook, a place for Black women, empowering exercises to build self-compassion and nurture your true self. So Rachel, thank you so much for joining us on the Healthy Black Girl Podcast. Finally.
Happy to be here. Happy to be here.
And you are now officially a part of the Healthy Black Girl Gang. So welcome, welcome, welcome. So Rachel, please tell the people about you and like what led you to create such a phenomenal piece.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to be here. And let's see. I mean, it's interesting when folks ask me to introduce myself. I'm working towards not introducing myself as what I do, but more who I am, right? And so I'm a Black woman. I'm a human. I'm a sister, a daughter, a friend, and those things are so important to me when I think about my identity and just like my trajectory and how that shaped me in this work. And my background is in mental health, maternal health, and public health. And so that's kind of what I've done. And so I was trained to be a therapist, social worker, and a marriage and family therapist. And then in true nerd fashion, started to dibble dabble in this holistic healing kind of modalities, became a doula and then a fertility doula and herbalist, all of the things. And really for that, it was just to help shape my worldview around people and particularly healing the Black community. Also the owner of a company called Half Hood, Half Holistic. And our goal is to create accessible and culturally relevant healing services centering Black folks and primarily Black women.
So that is a mouthful. So thank you so much for all that you do in the healing and wellness space, especially for somebody for myself who has been in this space for 20 plus years. So it definitely takes a village. And thank you so much for being a part of that healing village. I know you've probably heard me say numerous times, there's a lot of healers out there teaching and coaching that are not healed themselves. So they are perpetuating the hurt that they are currently experiencing or have yet to resolve. So in your lane and what you've experienced, like professionally, please tell me how what you saw led you to write or experience led you to write this book.
That's a good one. I think professionally is interesting because when I was in school and I was training to be a therapist, I was a baby therapist. One of the things that, my company was birthed out of was the fact that I could count on my hand how many Black folks I served. When I was in these community-based internships and in these settings that really claimed to be community-based, but weren't serving the folks that needed to be served. And so, that really led me on this healing journey. And that's actually how I became a doula and herbalist and all those things. Because I said, it must be something about Black folks that don't find themselves in this space, this therapy space. What is it? Where do Black folks go to get healing? And really that journey of coming home. And so when I kind of entered the space of holistic wellness and owning my own company and doing culturally relevant event spaces, it did two things. One, I noticed that it was privileged, right? And so one of the things that I believe is that healing should be accessible. Like people shouldn't have to work for that. People shouldn't have to like navigate systems to be there. You shouldn't have to financially be able to afford something. And so if I was serving a Black woman or a Black person that were kind of like, they kind of knew, right? They had a privilege to be able to get some of these healing services. And so I went on this quest to figure out, I'm always about the regular schmegular Black girl. Like if you're not serving them, you ain't serving them, right? Like I feel like if you can engage the regular schmegular Black girl that wears the hoops earring, like that's them my people, right? Right. I love that. And so I started to go on this pathway on like, how do I start to serve and engage the regular schmegular Black girl? Because I knew that I also didn't see myself in healing spaces. I just didn't felt that, because it was like therapy was too white, then holistic stuff was too privileged, right? Like it was like, I don't see myself in yoga, that hurts. Like, it just didn't feel like there was a space to be me, to show up with all my duality, to show up with all my personalities, I have my Solange side, but I got the Cardi B side too, right? It just never felt like, where's my space where I don't have to perform, right? I want to be able to not perform. And that really, I have my own personal journey. The first part of that journey was loving all of my sides first, right? Before I could even ask for a space that affirmed me, I had to affirm that for myself, right? And so then I started to do my own self-process, my own self-reflection work, and very proud of how far I've come to be able to show up as half hood, half holistic, to be able to show up continuously in every space, authentically aligned. It takes a lot of work to do that. The first thing, though, that I needed to recognize is that there wasn't anything wrong with me. I deserved to show up as I was, and that I could love myself regardless whether or not there was a space that did that for me.
Right.
And so then I started to create spaces that were geared towards Black women and all Black women, right? Not just like the ones that had access to it. I'm not a big fan of like cliques or elitist, that's just not me, right? And so I wanted to make sure everyone had access to it. And the thinking was, all right, so how do I create things that whether or not they can come to we do tribe check-ins, which is a monthly no cost virtual space. How do I start to engage? What does accessibility mean, right? Like really, if the mission was to build accessible pathways, what does accessibility mean? And so in my spirit said, you have to create things that whether or not they show up in this space that folks have access to. And so a workbook came up, right? And so how can folks lead their own healing journey or start to interact with things that felt accessible? Because maybe you can't make it into the group space or the therapy space or whatever. Maybe you're having a hard time, but maybe if you have something to work through at your own time, your own leisure, you still have access to healing. And that's kind of how the workbook was birthed.
I love one of the things that you said, and thank you so much for sharing that. One of the things that you said that really resonated with me, and I've always loved, I don't think I've ever told you this, but I've always loved your business name, Half Hood, Half Holistic. And I remember one of my friends from Oakland, she says, Tracy, when I met you, you were so like Bougetto. And I'm like, okay, whatever. And I think people often see the professional side of me that they don't see. Like I'm honestly one of the most holistic people that I know or really encounter. And I'm always striving for elevation and what that looks like for me. But it gets tiring, just in all transparency, me wearing that corporate hat and never just getting the opportunity to just woosah and breathe. And I think what that has done for me, I know for a fact what that has done for me, it's now rebirthed or emerged this side of me that's just like, if I am not prioritizing my rest in spaces of, mental wellness, my physical body, my emotional self, then I'm not doing myself justice and everything else can wait. And that is how so when you say in all of the dualities and me being a Black girl, me being, hence the title, Healthy Black Girl, because to me that involves and embodies so much. When we talk about wellness and what really reframing honestly what wellness looks like for me, because the corporate Tracy hasn't been honoring the wellness of me personally the way that it needs to be done. So there's a lot of shift in my life that's happening from a professional and a personal aspect right now. But I love the fact, because we're so intersectional in our beings, and that intersectionality really creates the magnificent beings that we are. That line of, yeah, I see you, yeah, that's me too, but yeah, that's unique about you and I want to learn more. So thank you so much for speaking to that, because I think the way, not I think, I know the way this society is set up, it's set up to, we have to box you in so we can understand you. And I've always resisted that narrative, because box me in and I'm gonna switch up on your ass on purpose because you just decided to box me in. Like, that's just my personality. I will purposely fuck your shit up because you decided to put me in a box,
Right.
and I see that with our sexuality. I see that in how we have to show up as Black women. Primarily, I always speak from a Black woman's perspective because I am one. But like, do you understand what I'm saying?
No, I get it. Absolutely. I feel like for me, that it's the boxes I get, and that's why I think
Like, check
people
this box. Like,
struggle. They struggle because again, even when I walk into spaces, people want to know what you do. They want you to describe yourself as, oh, I'm the director of this, or I'm the owner of this, or X, Y, and Z. And
when
I
I
just say,
tell you, I
no,
hate
I wear
that.
many hats.
I
Yes.
I hate that your worth is tied up into, or your value is tied up into what you do. And
Yes.
that's why I'm so determined on women not defining themselves through what they do, or anybody else, attaching themselves to anybody else. Like, who are you?
And that's important. I think really piecing that out and like real, like, I mean, and it starts with something simple like how you introduce yourself in your space. But I mean, a lot of that is conditioning, right? And like
Yeah.
it's being reinforced. And, sometimes it's like easier to understand folks if they're in a box. And, for me, it's just like, I'm interested in this. I'm gonna go ahead and do this. And I'm interested, folks wanted me to be a therapist. They want me to be a doula. They want me to just be one thing. And that's not that I'm
That's
interested in
not
all these
me.
kinds of things, and they're
Yeah,
intersectional, right? And so when I started
absolutely.
working, I'm like, the same Black women y'all serving over here, the same Black women that need to be served over here, like y'all missing the mark. And I mean, right, there's time and place for focus or grounding, but being grounded in who you are and not what you do is really, really important. One of the things that I had to think about was I'm like, I'm a damn good therapist. I'm a damn good doula. I'm a damn good leader. Like all of these things. Like I'm good at these things. But I'm only good at those because of who I am, right? Like that's literally the reason why I'm able, because I'm a person that's just how I see the world. That it makes sense to me, which then allows me to be good in these lanes, right? I can connect to folks. I'm authentic, all of these things. I'm determined, but these were qualities I had before I even stepped into these spaces, right? And then you hone in on those skills, you pick up some things, but it's important to know that it's not like I'm defined because I'm a good therapist and that defines me. Like, no, I'm a good person and that makes me a good therapist, right? Like
Mhm.
the things that I already inherently have, the work that I already inherently had in this world. And so it does, I mean, peeling back those layers and like untangling yourself from this web is and knowing how to navigate. I mean, that those spaces still exist. And so choosing to navigate that, having your power, right? Having your choice, taking that back and being able to walk into spaces the way you want to show up, not the way that you think you have to or people require you. That's what it's all about. Because no shame in your game if you still introduce yourself as X, Y, and Z. But I want you to do it because that makes sense for you, not because you don't have any choice or option, right? It's about reclaiming our power. And that's what self-love is reclaiming our power. Who gets to put me in a box? Where do I get my worth from? How do I navigate this world? Hopefully it starts with us, right? Hopefully we have that power. And so kind of going on this process to unlearn or relearn some things, it's a hard process.
Child. So speak to the Black girl, Black woman who is struggling with that identity, or identifying or claiming or reclaiming themselves. Like, what would your advice to that person be?
Yeah. I think there's power in externalizing things. I think one of the things that I would talk about in the book, and that I know to be true for Black women in particular, is that we sit in this intersection of caregiver, right? And
Yes, child.
that looks like in many ways, right? And
I
that might
think
be
you hit that in the like first half of the book. I was like, child. Rachel was talking about it's an easy read. It is, but it's what the words say. They may flow easily, but now your comprehension is gonna be like, what the hell? Yeah.
So that's important. I think, really pulling that out and calling what it is, right? We've been conditioned for like there's this aspect of grace and forgiveness there too, right? So I think the first thing is forgive yourself for the way you show up or the way you've traditionally showed up, right? Even if you feel like it doesn't serve you, maybe if you knew better, you do better, whatever that is, but really we're conditioned there, right? And so like there's a lot of history and context around Black women being conditioned to be caregivers, having to be caregivers for survival, right? Like we literally had to do this, right? If we wanted to survive or our families wanted to survive, there's no shame there, right? Being able to understand the way that that's reinforced by society in our families, in our communities, right? And so showing up as a caregiver is one thing, right? And so finding space, grace, and forgiveness for yourself is going to be the biggest thing, right? Being able to say like, this may be not how I want to show up, but this is how I've had to show up, right? It's like that's the biggest one for me. And then being able to understand how you want to participate with that identity, right? And so that's not who you are, right? It is just it's an aspect of what you do, and how much of that do you want to be able to like think about it as a relationship. How much do you want to participate as a caregiver? And how much of it is an energy exchange? When you put energy here, it takes energy away from here. So you start to have questions about what do you want, right? It really comes back to like rebalancing that power. It's saying like, all right, like let me externalize this, and you get to decide how much of that is your identity, how much of that you want to participate in. And sometimes we start to trick ourselves in that process, and we say, well, I have to do this, right? Like I gotta, if I don't do it, nobody else is gonna do it, right? Or what the kids gonna do? Like if I don't do X, Y, and Z, everybody's gonna, and that requires faith, right? And so it requires this faith and some trust and the ability to decenter ourselves in other people's
Mhm.
journeys.
So when I
Right?
tell you I am the queen of no, I have I have become the queen of get somebody else to do it,
Somebody
especially
else to do
at my
it.
house. Nope, nope. And I was already good, but I've gotten even better. And I can just only see myself, child, when I tell you it's gonna get even better, you know, because in me doing so, like I'm saying, so I'm giving myself so many yeses. There's that balance. There is that, yeah, I'm saying no to this because it's taking away from Tracy's overall greater good goal or purpose. And or I just don't want to. And no is a full and complete sentence that deserves no explanation and no apology.
Yeah. And that's important to know. I think about, boundary setting as an act of healing work, right? And us even relearning boundaries and what that means and what it is. And what I like to say is that boundaries is not about saying no or saying no to other people, it's about saying yes to
Yes,
yourself.
yourself.
Right.
Mhm.
And that's really important to know, is that you how do you come home, like can you know what I'm saying, it's like, all right, like you over here help everybody else clean their house. What's your house looking like?
Come on now. So let's talk about, first of all, you guys, if you guys are watching this, I hope you can see it, the book is not only pretty, but it feels good. Okay. So it feels good. And I think that was on purpose, but it feels good in your hands. I mean, not too many books, they just, the texture of this book alone makes you feel like you want to like delve into it. So talk to us about why you set the landscape of this book out the way that you did, because the first half of this book is different from the second half of this book. So can you speak to that?
Absolutely. And I think it's definitely not by chance that the book feels good. Because one of the things that I think about is, workbook, right? And like workshop and like how we always are conditioned to work, 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 right? Everything has to be productive. But I want to hold that intersection that you can work and feel good, right? Those you can want to be excited to do this work. And it not necessarily be like dreadful and hard and cold, right? Like you can find healing spaces that are warm and fun and ratchet. Like it can be whatever you want it to be. And so in the creation of the book, the layout, the first kind of half of it is like it reads as a traditional book. It gives kind of just overviews. Like any of those topics in that first half could be its own book on its own for sure. And so we start to really talk about one of the questions is there's a lot of audacity in writing a book. There's a lot of audacity in writing a book, a self-love book. There's a lot of audacity in writing a self-love book for women. And there's a hell of a lot of audacity in writing a self-love book that is centered in Black women, right? And if you don't get it, it ain't for you. That's okay. You ain't half holistic. It's not for you. That's good. But this is for the people that get that, right? There are not a lot of spaces that center Black women, that are safe, that are warm, that are fun. And so the audacity to even write a self-love workbook really needed to set some scene around why in particular is this intersection something that we need to be exploring. Because it could have just been a self-love workbook, could have been just a self-love workbook for women, but this is a self-love workbook for Black women. And
Right.
that's on purpose. It's very intentional. So that first kind of half of the book is really talking about like, sis, this is you. This is for you. This is why it's for you. It starts to give some history and context, right? I believe that that's important. Nothing in this world exists without history and context.
Right.
Start to let folks know, like, some of these concepts, before we start talking about you, let's talk about everything around you, right? Let's talk about how you participate in some of these things or they influence these things. And hopefully, as people work through that first half, people are starting to put some things together. Like, dang, that's what stereotypes, that's how that can impact me. That's how, friendships can impact me. That's, it talks about historical trauma, it talks about generational trauma. It just talks about like sis, you didn't just wake up in this world one day and struggle with self-love.
Right. It's
History and
by
context.
design.
And that's important. That alone, you could hopefully read the first half of that book and say, I'm feeling some healing, hopefully, right?
Right.
Because it's a conversation we're not having. And I think it's just important for folks to know Black people didn't wake up with disparities. We did not just exist there's nothing inherently wrong with you and your DNA. There's
Right.
nothing inherently wrong with Black women. There is
Right.
nothing inherently wrong with Black women and their image of self. And we live and exist in a context that has over and over and over and over again told us why we shouldn't love ourselves. And I don't think you don't do good justice if I'm just like, oh, love yourself. Just do some meditation. You're gonna be good, without addressing some of those other pieces.
I like the fact that you brought history into it and the narrative that we've been fed since before we even showed up in this space. And then you show up and then this is what you are browbeaten into in so many different aspects of society. So now let's move over to the second half of this book and why you from an author, but also from a creative aspect, created this book to be this way.
Yeah. So thank you. The second half of that is the workbook. This is where the work kind of begins, where your self kind of work, where you start to, there are a bunch of prompts, activities, affirmations, really spread out throughout the entire book, but in particularly the second half. And that is accountability, right? And so there's something about having a workbook in part. It's not a journal. There's some journal pages in there, but having a workbook in particular that that you go back to. You can engage, you can read the book front to back, you can start in the middle, whatever. You can, you can pick it up one day and then come back to it 3 months later. It's really set up to be able to flow with your own healing journey. But there is something about, you know, having this accountability measure around, okay, so this is what exists, but what you gonna do? Where's your power? And where does your power come back to? And so some of those, the landscape of that kind of goes from like individual, what are some of your strengths? What are some things you want to let go? It starts to talk about relationships. So people might think, oh, what does self-love have to do with relationship? Isn't that counterintuitive? Baby, you might actually learn in your relationships how much you don't love yourself, right? Some of the relationships, the friendships that we have, we're putting ourselves into that, right? And having healthy community is also an act of self-love, right? Having folks that we love and trust, and deserve in our life. So then it just, that second half of the book are full of activities, prompts, and affirmations to really get you to hone into the different layers of self-love, the different kinds of self-love. And it is just way beyond like looking in the mirror and telling yourself that you love yourself, right? It's way beyond the bubble baths and the massages, right? It's beyond what we've learned around self-care. It's really meant to dive in deeper, to take that little deep dive and say, listen, I know we all just making it like, and it can be, and I hope that the activities hit different at different stages of your life. You could revisit this workbook and say, oh, look at that. But also it can hit different for all Black women at different points in their healing journey. So maybe you got a therapist, and maybe you done some self-work, maybe you good at setting boundaries. You can still pick something up from the book.
It's a journey. It's never ever ending. And part of me, I appreciate this lane that Black women are in, as far as like, reclaiming their time, but I'm also getting pissed off that we have to reclaim our time. It's like, living in a space of like, why we gotta always heal from y'all? And so I'm struggling, me personally, with that. And it's just, it doesn't matter from like what the Black woman looks like, how old the Black woman is, where the Black woman lives, or what the Black woman does. The narrative is still the same. So I like the fact that you can go back at different points in your life or in your journey and being able to either say, wow, I remember when, and say, I did that, or, you pick it up in a different time in your life and be like, oh, it's time for me to tackle this. Because one of the things that I experienced when I, started the book was like, okay, I'm ready to do this. I was like, I'm not. And I think it's also too, because I live so much in the space, sometimes I just need a break from the space. So, I know you can relate to that. So for you, how were you healed in creating this book?
That's such a good question. There are so many ways. I mean, just like stepping into this title or space as an authher or somebody.
I'm gonna speak to that, because my book comes out this year, child.
I know. Yeah. So and then I get to interview you, and we're gonna.
Yes, we're gonna. Yes, I am taking it all.
But stepping into the space as an author, or I mean, literally the amount of times that I had to contend with the fact that I had something to say, right? That I was an authority or had authority on some sort of knowledge or something. I want to be clear that none of these things are new, different. I didn't create anything. I didn't, we Black women know how to heal, right? But for a long time, I think we've gotten our survival and our healing mixed up. And I really want to be able to get folks to move.
You want to say that again for the folks in the back? We've done what now?
Have gotten our survival and our healing mixed up. Okay, those things are crisscrossed. And so sometimes folks are just surviving, and you got to do what you got to do, and you deserve more. You're worthy of more. Let me help you. And so I think that's important. All of this, the knowledge in there, all of that stuff created by Black women, concepts on intergenerational trauma created by Black women, right? Like all of that, none of I want to be clear, I just put it all together and gave it a little different tone and voice to it. But I want to be clear, none of this information is new information because Black women already did that. And so, I want to honor and give homage to that. And that was one. So there was this piece of like being an author, and I really combated some hard self-sabotage, right? I really came up, it was very similar to my transition as into being a business owner. Part of that is really some socialization around women and what we have to say. Black women, do I deserve to be in this space? Like really asking myself questions. And just like those negative self-talk it comes up for me too, right? Even in my journey. And so I had to really push through that. I had to heal through that. I had to tell myself that I deserve this. I had writing deadlines that I needed to make and I never made any of them. Not because I couldn't,
Right.
not because I couldn't.
I'm laughing because I can relate.
Literally, not because I couldn't, because I could sit down and chop out, pages on page. When I got into the mode, I could, but it just, I literally never made any of my writing deadlines. And I don't know, like, I'm like, girl, what is that? Because I would wait till like day or 2 or 3 days after, then sit down and chop it out and be good. All I needed was an hour or 2 to really make those deadlines a focus. And I just wouldn't do it, right? And this is self-sabotage behaviors that were coming up. I will never forget. It was actually, I think, February last year when I had submitted my final transcript, right? And so and then it started going to print and all of that stuff. It was literally, I just remember crying, like reading through this. First of all, it would be times where I would read through, it's like, dang girl, you did that. Like you did that. I wrote. But even now, it's weird to step into the space as an author. I don't talk about my book, so I appreciate the space of this, because sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot I wrote this book. But this thing happens where Black women will reach that I don't even know, right? Like I think there's this space of like, this lives, like this is really living. And I think I knew that. It's vulnerable. There's risk. People get to rate it. They get to critique it. They get to, all of that. There's some risk in that. It's vulnerable. But like when Black women are affirmed, there's people finding me on Facebook like, oh my God, I'm so happy you wrote this. I periodically will go back to the reviews on Amazon, which is probably torture, but I will periodically go back to the reviews and just read like what people have to say. And I'm in Facebook groups around mental health and therapy, and somebody will ask like, oh, do y'all have any workbook suggestions? And to have another therapist I don't even know drop the link, like I'm like, wow. Oh, like, I was doing an event in a completely different space a few weeks ago, and the book was like it was like on the shelf somewhere, and one of the women were like, hey, I just bought this book, and the other one was like, yeah, I'm a therapist, I use this book, and they were like, oh, that's Rachel's book. Like I was like, oh yeah, that's me. Like they're like, oh my God. And so I say all that to say is that there was this risk. There's risk in everything, right? There's some vulnerability. And if I would have fed into those negative self-talk, that self-sabotage, then I wouldn't have came out on the other side, right? I would not have been creating this, that I needed to do that. And that was a part of my purpose. It was part of what I needed to do. And I still feel weird. I don't go back and read the book. I haven't worked with myself. There's something weird there around like, this is me. And I'm still working on that.
That's an artist thing. Like, I've been an artist all my life. And when I started doing like interviews and television interviews or magazine interviews, I never go back and watch my interviews. I never go back and read what's been written ever. I never go back and listen to the panels that I've been on because I'm my own worst critic. I never go back and listen to any of these podcasts. So every time that Healthy Black Girl podcast is published, it's raw on purpose. And, part of that is like, if I go back in for me and edit, I'm going to be critiquing, and I want people really just to get the authentic experience. So I totally, what you're feeling is very common, and I too can relate.
Yeah. The other source of healing as that it took to write this book is relying on and thinking about building a community of Black women. One of the things that I haven't talked about at all, that I don't think, is that I was very strategic in the case examples that I used and the names. And so all of the names in the book are Black women that I love or that mentored me or showed up in my life. All of the case examples come straight from Black women that I've served. Like this book is for and by Black women, right? And that to me means so much to me, right? Like I was very strategic and like making sure that I was pulling from my relationships with Black women that I created. I was not born into relationship or a healthy relationship with Black women. I was not born into healthy community with Black women. And that alone is its own healing journey. And to look around now and see that I have been able to attract dope ass Black women and just love that for myself, right? Like there is no love like a dope ass Black woman that's genuine.
That's true.
When Black women get together and they're genuine and they're healing, there's an energetic shift. There's a vibe there.
Is.
And you can tell. And that is something that I live in every day now. I didn't experience that. I didn't grow up. I grew up with a single father. So like my first half of trajectory, good amount of my years had been estranged relationships with Black women. Black women were the first people that sexualized me. Black women were the first people that would comment on my hair or call me bougie or whatever. Like I remember some of the harm. And so to even have to heal through that for myself and love myself as a Black woman, by extension, allows me to heal other and love other Black women.
I speak to that in my book too. So I'm so glad, child. I'm so glad you're like touching on, because I can relate so much in your experience with my own personal journey. Yeah. So thank you so much for sharing that. So now tell the people where they can find you if they want to work with you, explore your therapy services. Like, where can they find you?
Yes, thank you. So again, I'm owner of Half Hood, Half Holistic. And so you can find us on Instagram at Half Hood, Half Holistic, Facebook, Half Hood, Half Holistic, and then on our website at www.halfhoodhalfholistic.com. And then on that website, you will find different tabs, the reproductive wellness services that we offer, coaching services. I do some couples and co-parenting support, because what I do know is that your self-love journey is tied to relationships, and we need to heal that. And then if you would like to reach out for me for workshops, trainings, consulting, any of the above, and very soon doula trainings, right? That will all be found on that website.
Thank you, Rachel. And you guys, everything that she mentioned, we will make sure to tag it in the description below. So if you're listening to this, you can, surface back down at the bottom. If you're watching this, you can also do the same. Thank you, Rachel, so much for taking the time. I'm so glad we can make this work. You guys, this has literally been on the book since last year. We have been going back and forth with times, trying to get Rachel on the show. So I'm glad finally the schedules aligned, the stars aligned, and we could have this conversation, a much needed conversation. And that I could take, like you said, any of these subject matters and make it a full episode of Healthy Black Girls. But thank you so much. You guys, please be sure to follow Rachel for more insight, and the book purchase link is also in the description. So go support. You will not be disappointed. You will just only elevate because of it. And thank you, Rachel, so much for being a part of the Healthy Black Girl Gang and being here on the show.
Thank you so much. I'm grateful.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Healthy Black Girl Podcast. Be sure to follow us on all of our social media platforms as Healthy Black Girl Podcast on Instagram and Facebook. And you can follow me personally, Tracy Collins, on Instagram. See you next time.